breastfeeding in communities of color. This issue is actually quite a bit bigger than that. It's about structural inequities that are propagated through ongoing policies that are built into the very fiber of the institutions that oversee our, first of all, our health care, but trickle down to breastfeeding policies and how or how not breastfeeding is supported. So racial inequity is more often a cumulative result of how multiple institutions and policies intersect rather than the result of an individual or organization's actions. And so that's what I'm getting at. What I hope you'll leave here with today is or one of the many things I hope you'll leave here with today is a great curiosity about how to dissect your organization's or your institution's policies, to examine them and see how they may be creating persistent barriers to those from communities of color. So that's sort of the point. From the CDC, and I'm going to focus specifically on African American because that's my cultural group and the only one I claim to know anything about. So we're going to focus on African Americans, but some of it may also apply to other communities of color. But according to the CDC, African American women are much less likely than other groups, except perhaps Native American women. It depends on whose numbers you're looking at, to breastfeed their babies. And this lack of exposure leads to those greater rates of infant both morbidity and mortality. So we have a lot at stake here. When moms don't breastfeed, it absolutely impacts long-term outcomes for those infants. And I know I'm preaching to the choir on that, so I won't, that's not the focus of today's talk, because I'm assuming you know that. These are some numbers from 2008, and basically, again, from the CDC, and they show that while breastfeeding rates have risen among all groups, and that's great news, the black-white disparity persists. So even as numbers rise, the disparities between black breastfeeding rates and white breastfeeding rates still persist. Breastfeeding and systemic discrimination. This is another systemic review, and I love the way their parting statement on this systemic review. The first available research on breastfeeding intervention fails to consider the influence of racism across all system levels of the social ecological spectrum, although systemic discrimination is well documented and underlines African American women's chances for optimal health. So they come right out and say it, and they really blast folks for doing all the work around disparities in breastfeeding and really not addressing systemic discrimination and racism, because that's a big, it's the elephant in the room. No one wants to have that discussion, but until we do have that discussion, we're really not going to make significant change. So, and again, these are older numbers, but they show racial difference breakdown. These are probably numbers you've seen before. They're from a while back, from 2008. So what factors create these inequities? So let's look at some of the things that play into it. I'm not picking on IBLCE. I'm a lactation consultant myself, but we have way too little diversity in that credential. So taken from the IBLCE website, so this is their own data. There are about 26,000 IBCLCs in the world. About half of them, roughly half of them, are here in the United States. IBLCE currently does not track the racial status of their members, although I personally encourage them to start doing so. But we do know most IBCLCs are Caucasian. They tend to be either registered nurses or registered dietitians, overwhelmingly female, of course, and tend to be older rather than younger. And what the IBLCE does not track, I happen to find in a research article, the National Survey of Insurance Reimbursement. So among those IBCLCs that did seek reimbursement from insurance, they did track by racial status. So here's what they found among those who submitted for insurance reimbursement. So I'm not saying these numbers reflect everything, just those who submitted for insurance reimbursement. What they had was 81% of IBCLCs being white non-Hispanic, as opposed to that race representing about 63% of the greater American population. And then for black IBCLCs, 1.6%, even though they make up 12% of the population. So you can see, even with Hispanic and Asian, comparatively, there's a huge disparity there among African American breastfeeding professionals. And so a lot of my work in my organization does center around boosting those numbers. But there's certainly work that's been done and that is being done that looks at how low-income African American women access a breastfeeding professional, and we need to continue to look at those numbers because they do show there's less access. And anecdotally, I think, as Danielle said, those of us who work in the field hear women complain all the time that they don't get access to a breastfeeding professional that's an IBCLC, and that is part of the issue. Unnatural Causes is a film series. If you haven't seen it yet, I do encourage you to look at it. I've given you well, I'm not going to show it here now, but I've given you a link. But in it, the Dr. Liu just names it as an OBGYN here, but now he's actually head honcho of Health and Human Services now, so he's sort of moved up the food chain since this slide was made. But in this series, he's talked about how his theory that women of color, their endurance of racism over their lifetime, not just their 9 months of pregnancy, but over their lifetime, creates a level of stress that compromises the health of their pregnancies. And that can certainly feed over into breastfeeding as well. So I encourage you to watch When the Bow Breaks. Along those same lines is the weathering hypothesis, which another group of physicians came up with. This theory that suggests that, again, over the course of black women's lives, their reproductive systems prematurely age because of the stress they're continually subjected to, most of which is, or some of which at least, is racially based. So what is the role of systemic racism and white privilege? So this is where the conversation, just so that there's some clarity and that we're on the same foot, I'm going to give a few definitions. So when I say structural racism, what I mean is inequities that are built into the key structures of society: educational, legal, employment, housing, healthcare. They're built in that way. And if I lose you here at this definition, then I would encourage you to go back and do a little historical learning and learn about the history of things like redlining and how school districts set up and how they're funded and housing and the GI Bill and the creation of suburbs. And of course, Oklahoma has a very unique history of some of these things with Native Americans. But these things, these differences were purposeful and created by law. These inequities were built in by law. They are historical, they are generational, and they haven't just gone away. They don't just evaporate. If these things are to change, we will have to be purposeful and intentional in making them change. So none of this has just come about by happenstance. Structural discrimination is the expression of that racism through discriminatory acts in the lives of selected populations. So white privilege, for those who might not be familiar with that concept, sometimes it's known as white skin privilege, is a set of societal privileges existing in predominantly white societies which benefit white people beyond what is commonly experienced by non-white people in the same social, political, or economic circumstances. So that's the definition we're going to go with here for this morning. So I want to introduce you to a few other concepts, a few other definitions. Cultural awareness, cultural congruent care, and culturally competent care. And these are from the theory of transcultural nursing. That's where I get these definitions from. Cultural awareness is recognizing biases, prejudice, and assumptions about other people. So that's just knowing what you believe and having awareness that you might, or your organizational culture might think differently about certain people groups. That's just having the awareness. Culturally congruent care, actually I want to talk about culturally competent care. No, I'll do it culturally congruent care. Fits into people's valued life patterns and sets of meanings. So it's generated from the people themselves based on predetermined criteria. And I want to emphasize culturally congruent care because I think that's the gold standard we should be reaching for. Culturally competent care is the ability of the practitioner to build cultural gaps in caring, work with cultural differences, and enable families and clients to achieve meaningful and supportive caring. So I actually see this one as more middle ground and culturally congruent care as what we should be reaching for. And you may have questions about what's the difference between the two, and mainly it's that this one, culturally congruent care, proceeds from the people themselves. A lot of us think that the great standard of caring for people is to treat them how we would want to be treated. But I would actually challenge you on that. I think the greater standard is treating people how they want to be treated. And when folks define the boundaries and the content of their own care, I think you have a much higher standard. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Cultural humility is a really important concept here. It incorporates a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and critique, to redressing the power imbalances of the provider-patient dynamic, and developing mutually beneficial and non-paternalistic partnerships with communities of color, mainly here. is what we're talking about. So a sense of cultural humility is really a necessary ingredient in embarking on this journey. So a sense of, I like how they say it, um, self-evaluation, or in this case, since we're looking at organizations and institutions, self-evaluation in the context of your organization. Just because this is the way you've always done something does not mean that's the way it should continue to be done. And so that continuous evaluation is an important part of solving the problem. So let's talk about how some of these things might manifest themselves. So I'm taking this from the work of Gerald Wing Sue, who writes about racial microaggressions and how they occur. And I've tried to give you some examples of how these might play out in the healthcare setting or public health setting in the breastfeeding sphere. So communications, microinvalidations are communications that subtly exude or negate or nullify the thoughts, feelings, or experiential reality of a person of color. So they are, and often that is expressed as exclusion. You don't see it there. So exclusion, of course, by its very nature is can be very subtle. You just don't see yourself as a part of the process, or a person of color can experience this every day in about a million different ways. And the example I've given you here is providing print matter that only shows dominant culture women breastfeeding. So women of all cultures really need to see themselves breastfeeding. They need to see other women of color breastfeeding. They need to see it normalized in that way. And if they never see that, it sends a subtle message that this is not for you. This is not a part of your culture. So you have to be wary of things like that. It's not even an act of commission, it's an act of omission that still results in an invalidating of breastfeeding for women of color. Micro insults can be verbal or nonverbal. They are environmental communications that subtly convey rudeness or insensitivity that demean a person's racial heritage or identity. And one of the ways I see a micro insult expressed in breastfeeding is the assumption that African American women won't want to breastfeed their babies. And so as a nurse myself, I spent my early career as a labor and delivery nurse before I became an IBCLC. And I saw that clearly happen all the time around me when a nurse had to decide where her valuable time was going to be used. Sometimes decisions were made based on the race of the patient. If she thought, well, this mom is probably not going to breastfeed, so I don't want to spend too much time, because last week I spent 2 hours with a mama helping her get her baby on. Came back the next shift, she was giving baby a bottle, so I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to invest that time. And I'm not saying that's not reasonable and that nurses don't have to make those kinds of choices, but when you continuously do that, then it deprives that mother, of course, maybe it's only 1 in 10, but it deprives that mother who would have breastfed of the opportunity to have that assistance that she so desperately needed. And we all do this. We're all human. We all make these choices. But if we're making them continuously based on the race of the person, we can really get ourselves into trouble, and we can really feed those inequities that we think we're trying to solve. Micro assaults, conscious and intentional discriminatory actions. So that might be grabbing a mother's breast without asking permission or making negative comments about her physiology. And sometimes I did see nurses do this, not necessarily intentionally, but again, they didn't often realize how it was received. But making comments about the size of the mother's breast or the size of her nipples could really discourage a mother and be seen as an assault on her person, or at least the formation of her physiology. Oh, what did I do wrong? There we go. So there are other types of microaggressions: marginalization, issues relegated to the fringes. Those issues might be included that are relevant to communities of color, but thought of at the last minute or put off to the side. Invisibility, which is even worse, not even noticed enough to be included, not noticing who is not in the room when decisions are being made, especially if those decisions impact communities of color or their representatives of those communities present when the decisions are made. Trivialization, issues are dismissed, telling women of color not to be so overly sensitive when she expresses discomfort of being the only woman of color in the room. Trivialization is another form of microaggression. One of the terms that I really like, I didn't coin this, but I use it a lot, is disparities pimping. It's another way that we prolong the impact of inequities. And disparities pimping is actually quite the norm. And many of our organizations and institutions do this all the time, especially if they're grant seeking. Using the data of communities or populations that demonstrate the disparities to gain funding or other assets, and then using those funds or assets to benefit someone or something other than those communities from whom that data was gathered. So that's something I see happen routinely. Running programs to end disparities that remain ineffective in changing outcomes is a form of disparities pimping. Talking the talk of ending disparities, but not walking the walk. So no really definitive or effective action that is actually going to have an impact on the rates of infant mortality or the rates of low breastfeeding rates. But talking about those things and using those statistics, those data from vulnerable communities to make your case, but not having an impact on those outcomes. That's disparities pimping. And I'd like to challenge you, even though we're talking about institutions and organizations, I'd like to challenge you. Have you heard any of these statements? Have you made any of these statements yourself? I would invite you to much closer introspection and critical self-examination for the problems behind some of these statements. I'm colorblind. I don't see race. That's a problem, because if you don't see race, that means you really don't see me, because I am part and parcel of what defines me is my race and my cultural identity, which I happen to hold very dearly. So not seeing that basically erases me, or at least a large part of me. And that's a problem. It also, we're going to talk about culture a little bit more in a minute, but it also devalues what I bring to the table as far as my cultural ways of being. Are they going to be honored? Are they going to be respected? Do you even know what they are? When you're designing something to reach me, are you taking those things into consideration? And it can be hard for me to believe that you're doing that if you take a colorblind stance, because I want you to take a good, close look at me, not erase whole swaths of who I am. If you've ever asked, what about reverse racism? That's an issue. There are those that would say dominant culture folks have it harder. And I do think I would say that dominant culture folks are probably under a bigger microscope than in previous times. But the kind of structural and institutional racism that I'm speaking of comes with power, and it's that power to create the policies that create the structural racism that I might argue doesn't exist for dominant culture folks. So while you can certainly have individuals who are prejudiced and can act in discriminatory ways toward dominant culture people, that is a separate issue from structural racism. Don't blame me. I wasn't alive when all those bad things happened. And of course, a statement like this supposes that all the bad things happened in the past and that people of color, communities of color aren't being impacted by discrimination right now in their everyday lives today. Can't be racist. My best friend or spouse or cousin, fill in the blank, whatever, is African American or whatever person of color. That unfortunately doesn't save you. And again, our focus here isn't on personal racism, but institutional racism. But you might want to be a little bit more introspective if you're thinking the presence of people of color in your life means that you don't have to critically examine these issues for yourself. We don't have those problems here. So I hear that a lot when I travel around the country, you know, that they may have those issues elsewhere. So I look around and try and soak in the nirvana they must be living in that makes their place so special, because as far as I know, these issues are pretty universal in the United States. This isn't really a race issue, it's a class issue. So I hear some of that too, and to a certain extent I'm going to give you that one. It certainly is true that class and race become intertwined when we talk about some of these issues, but if you go back and watch When the Bow Breaks, those folks are making the argument that even upper and middle class African American women still suffer the same poor birth outcomes, the same poor breastfeeding outcomes, and so there's something more to this than just poverty or class or socioeconomic status. It really is beyond that. Teach me what I need to know. That sounds innocuous enough, but it's not my job as a person of color to teach dominant culture folks what they need to know about structural racism and discrimination, even though technically that's what I'm doing right now. But most of the work is yours to do, is to take this and run with it and see what you can discover and find out. Because I tell you, once you begin to see it, you won't ever unsee it again. I treat everyone the same. This one particularly is hard for folks to give up because they see this as a very high value, that, you know, you can't accuse me of discrimination. I treat everybody the same. Everybody gets the same treatment from me. But again, that harkens back to the value of treating everyone how you want to be treated, as opposed to the higher value of treating everyone like they want to be treated. And so distinctions are going to have to be made. Of course, it's much harder work. You have to put in more work to learn how that person wants to be treated and to treat them that way. You have to learn about other people's cultures, about other people's ways of being, and that's a lot more work than to just treat everybody the same. So here's a better approach. And these next suggestions are all taken from Kansas University Community Toolbox, which I highly recommend as a resource when you want to get started on learning more about these things. Each cultural group has unique strengths and perspectives that the larger community can benefit from. That is so true. I can remember recently being with a small group of friends. My husband and I were out with two other couples. The other two couples were Caucasian couples. And we got into a very heated conversation about this whole idea of systemic racism and discrimination. And finally, I was fed up and I said, okay, I dare any of you, I dare each of you, tell me something positive and good and redemptive about African American culture. You know, only one person at that table could give me a response. They gave me a great response, but only one person could give it. So what that told me, at least in that small instance, was that there was a gross lack of knowledge and appreciation about my particular culture, and probably a lot of negative assumptions about my culture, that no one could answer that simple question. But when we lose that, then we all lose. That's sort of the point behind this. You don't, just because you're dominant culture doesn't mean that you're not losing in this equation. You're losing the benefit that would come to you by knowing and understanding other cultures on a deeper level. Cultural acceptance. Understanding cultures will help us overcome and prevent racial and ethnic divisions. It's funny how many people think just the opposite. Shh, don't talk about race. That's racist. Don't talk about race. And actually, folks, the opposite is true. We actually should be having more conversations. Not more. I don't think we've started having any. But we should be having these conversations about race. Are they going to be uncomfortable? Yes. Are they going to be difficult? Yes. But I think in the end, we're all going to benefit. But because we can't accept and appreciate something that's a mystery and completely unknown to us. So I think the conversations will ultimately, even though we're going to go through a difficult period first, I think they will ultimately bring us together, which is really what we all want. We all want to sort of in this fantasy, we're all holding hands, singing Kumbaya. I'm not opposed to that fantasy, but the way we get to it, I think folks have very different. Some people think we get to it by ignoring our differences, and I believe we'll get to it by acknowledging and celebrating our differences. So, cultural inclusion. People from different cultures have to be included in decision-making processes in order for programs and policies to be effective. That's so true. It really harkens back to my slide on cultural humility, on microaggressions that lead people of color out of decision-making for decisions that impact their communities and their communities' health. And it certainly speaks to disparities pimping, where you think you can make choices for other communities without them being present to have input. Social equity. An appreciation of cultural diversity goes hand in hand with a just and equitable society. Again, which is my earlier point, we'll all be better off in the end if we go ahead, have these difficult conversations, tussle with it, come out on the other side, if we truly want, that's the price we're going to pay to have a socially equitable, inclusive society, not pretend that there's no difference between us and tiptoe around it, but meet it head on and talk about it and discuss it and acknowledge some hard truths. So I want to finish up. Where are we time-wise? I know I talk slow. All right. And so I want to make sure I'll keep moving through these slides. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what I do in Kansas City through my organization, Uzazi Village. Uzazi is a Swahili word. It means birth. And our mission at Uzazi Village is to improve perinatal outcomes in communities of color. So that's it in a nutshell. That's what we're about. And my life, my role, my privilege of being a maternity care nurse for all of my career has really brought me to this point, has brought me to the point of wanting to start an organization such as Uzazi Village. I was not one of those people who can make change within the organization, not at least as fast as I wanted it to happen. So I've learned to become an outsider and make change from out there, and that seems to work fine for me. Although I certainly applaud those who can hang in and make change within institutions. So one of our goals is to increase breastfeeding rates among low-income African American women. And we target parents, professionals, birth facilities, really anyone who comes in contact with that childbearing family. Community-based clinics, all of those folks become our target. We don't want to just target the families that are impacted. We actually want to influence and impact those organizations that touch those families, because often that's where the bigger issue lies. And then our strategies, we use a lot of community education for our families, but professional education for the professionals, sort of like what I'm doing today, and then culturally specific support for our families. So we try and match our education, our support, our care to the culture of the folks that we see coming for care or coming for education, in hopes of improving our reach. So here's a few of our programs. There's some of our Uzazi Village workers. Perinatal community health workers. So we have an innovative model. It's known as the Sister Doula program. All our sister doulas are taken from the community. They have to live in specific zip codes to be accepted into our program. We train them as perinatal community health workers. We call them sister doulas, but their role is really much more expansive. We have contracts with the Medicaid managed care organizations, and so the MCOs send us their clients. We match them with the sister doula, and the sister doula companions them through the pregnancy, the birth and delivery, of course, and postpartum. They have several visits throughout the pregnancy, birth, and postpartum period. And the goal of the Sister Doula program is to, of course, impact those birth outcomes, the greatest of which in our population of African American moms is prematurity, issues related to low birth weight, and low breastfeeding rates. So we do have incredible impact on breastfeeding. I think from our last data, about 93% of our sister doula mothers breastfed, which is pretty phenomenal for the population we're working with. So our sister doulas do have impact, but they are a community, perinatal community health worker model. Chocolate Milk Cafe is a support group model. Probably one of the most controversial things we do. Ozazi Village actually does have a La Leche League group. We have a La Leche League group as well. It's the only La Leche League in our entire city, and we have like 14 chapters. It's the only one that meets in an African American community. So I was really devoted. I was very devoted to having a La Leche League. I attended La Leche League. Of course, I had to go outside of my community when I was having my babies to go to La Leche League, but I did that for 7 years. I think it's a fine model, but I think it's a model that has not translated itself to the African American community. Hence, the Chocolate Milk Cafe. So this is a breastfeeding support group model that I created. And the Chocolate Milk Cafe is specifically for African and African American women to come and support one another in their breastfeeding goals. It's a mother-to-mother support group model. It's been recognized by IBLCE so that our chocolate milk facilitators can count their hours toward IBLC requirements. But it's not been without its controversy, but it's an effective model that really works for a group of women who have largely been left out of formal mother-to-mother breastfeeding support. Baby wearing, I'm gearing up for that now. We got another baby wearing class as soon as I get back home this Saturday. So we call them baby wearing fashion shows. So we put the chairs on either side and the mom comes down modeling her baby carrier. And there are about 6 different types of baby carriers. So we get 6 moms. They model it. They show how their baby goes in, how their baby goes out. The baby can go in the front or baby goes in the back. What size baby, what age baby. So they're getting the lesson in the form of a fashion show. So it's really cute. But we absolutely believe that baby wearing is integral to breastfeeding support. So that's why we do it. And we have a relationship with several baby carrier manufacturing companies, so they donate to us. And so everyone who attends our baby wearing fashion show leaves with baby wearing gear. So they get to pick something out and take it home with them. We also have a relationship, which is a wonderful example of dominant culture, allyship, and partnering. We have a relationship with our local BWI, Baby Wearing International group, which is out in the suburbs, but all year long they collect used baby wearing gear, they clean it, they refurbish it, they package it up, and they donate to us 2 or 3 times a year. So that also keeps our supply stock. So we have new and gently used baby wearing gear. We have tons. We have tons. We always have plenty to give away. And different companies will hear and they'll call us up and want to donate to that. But we're never at a shortage for that. And it's really one of our most well-attended events is our baby wearing fashion show. And we do a little teaching. I get up and give my little blurb about the benefits of baby wearing and its relationship to long-term breastfeeding. And we also happen to be doing a research project with a researcher out of the University of Hawaii who's researching how baby wearing impacts the duration of breastfeeding. So we have a little questionnaire that the moms fill out at the baby wearing show, and then I call them 3 months later, which is just before the next baby wearing show because we only do it once a quarter. And then I give them the retest. And so we're tracking how long or if there's any correlation between baby wearing and breastfeeding duration. We have 2 days a week. We have a walk-in breastfeeding clinic that's also connected with the Lactation Consultant Mentorship Program. So I told you that I was really committed to diversifying the ranks of IBCLCs, and to that end, I've started a Lactation Consultant Mentorship Program. So we have our lactation interns, as we call them, with us for the 2-day-a-week breastfeeding clinic. But we also have other community-based sites. So currently we have 3 hospitals, 2 pediatric practices, and 2 community-based clinics that also take our interns. So currently we have 4 interns enrolled in our mentorship program, and it takes them an average of about 10 months to get their Pathway 3 500 hours. So we move them through pretty quickly. And because we're always doing professional education, most of which is breastfeeding education, our interns get their 90 hours of breastfeeding education through us too. So that's our Lactation Consultant Mentorship Program. Our interns, our program is a sliding scale fee. Our interns pay between $1,500 and $3,000 for our year-long internship program, depending on their income. And then we do offer a annual scholarship for a candidate of color who is sitting for the IBCLC exam that year. So they have to have completed everything and show the letter that they're approved to take the test, and then they can be eligible for consideration for the scholarship. So those are some of the things that we are doing at Uzazi Village that are community-based, that are culturally congruent with promoting breastfeeding in our community. And then I wanted to play this. This is a sneak peek at our chocolate milk cafe, because people are often curious about what goes on there. You want to click that, and it's about 6 minutes long, and it's radio, so there's nothing to look at. You'll just hear it. But this is when National Public Radio came to Uzazi Village and did a story on our chocolate milk cafe.
Baby Marcus is a little over a month old. Today he's getting weighed for the 2nd time since he was born. Marcus's mom, Tempest, has been breastfeeding him.
Oh, big baby. You okay, big baby? You gained a whole pound and 6 ounces, buddy.
Tempest is African American. She's one of the few women she knows in her community who's breastfed beyond her first days in the hospital.
Before I even was pregnant, I was like, when I get pregnant, I want to breastfeed. But, you know, it gets kind of downing when people are like, oh, it's going to hurt, oh, this or that. So it kind of like gives you that doubt in the back of your head.
She says it's here at Uzazi Village, not at home, that she's gotten a lot of breastfeeding support.
Coming here, it just boosted back up, like, don't care what nobody else says. You're always going to have a naysayer. Go ahead and do it.
On the corner of 37th and Troost, Uzazi Village is right off the bus line. The weathered delicatessen sign still hangs above the building's wide storefront windows. Inside, the open room is laid with dark refurbished wood, bare brick walls, and a high exposed ceiling. Executive Director Sherry Payne says the place has good karma. She's a nurse and has taught labor and delivery. Payne says it was during her first time breastfeeding that she received a vision for what she wanted to do.
When I was laying there after successfully having that home birth and successfully breastfeeding, and I'm sort of in the warm afterglow and holding my newborn, and I thought, and I remember thinking this very clearly, this is what I want to spend the rest of my life doing, helping women to have experiences like this one.
And a year and a half ago, Payne's vision came to fruition. Uzazi is a Swahili word meaning birth. And Uzazi Village is geared specifically to improving birth outcomes for women living in the urban core, especially low-resource African-American women. Sherry Payne says the organization grew out of a community meeting where she posed the question,
if this community could create its own maternity care system, what would that look like?
Based on the community's response to that question, Sherry Payne and 3 other local women drew up a strategic plan and found the space to open Uzazi Village. Here, families can take the childbirth boot camp class or get advice from the on-staff lactation consultant or get paired with a doula. That's a non-medical person who provides physical and emotional support to a pregnant mom. All of these services are free to women in the community. Right now, Uzazi doesn't offer any medical services. Rather, it's a place for community education and support for issues in pre- and postnatal care. A key part of that is breastfeeding support. Though Payne says most women aren't looking for breastfeeding support when coming to Uzazi.
We haven't breastfed for generations. It didn't just happen overnight.
Kathy Barber is a national breastfeeding advocate. She's written 2 books on economic and social barriers preventing African American women from breastfeeding. The barriers are multifaceted. Some are institutional. Barber says she's concerned that healthcare providers are less likely to talk with a black woman about breastfeeding because they assume she'll use formula. There's also economic barriers. Many of the women at Uzazi work jobs without paid maternity leave and have to go back to work soon after giving birth. And at work, there's often no private space to pump breast milk, so formula seems more convenient. Kathy Barber says there are social hurdles, too.
The black family right now is not as united as it once was. There's a high divorce rate. And because it was once a very united community, when the black family started to shift, breastfeeding also started to shift because families weren't together.
And now that fewer black women are breastfeeding, Barber says many don't have someone serving as a breastfeeding role model.
We don't see our friends breastfeeding. We may not have seen our mothers or our aunties or our grandmothers breastfeeding. So you look at the history, you look at the lack of modeling, you look at the lack of education, the lack of support, and then you get to 2013, all of these factors come together.
That's where Uzazi Village steps in to try and normalize breastfeeding in the black community. One way is through mother-to-mother support here at the Chocolate Milk Cafe. It's the only breastfeeding support group in Kansas City that's exclusively for African American women.
I'm Tempest Brown. Yeah. This is little Marcus. He is a month and a week now.
Alexis, I have a 6.5-year-old and an 11-month-old.
My name's Anika. This is Sage. She is 10 months. No problems with her. Very chubby, chunky girl.
Today, Jamisha Wade is leading a group of 4 women, and this week's theme is, I've got all my sisters with me.
When I happened first, we were at a black church in Fort Knox, Kentucky, and I didn't have anywhere to nurse. So I nursed on the back steps because I wasn't confident enough to nurse in church, and she was kind of a loud baby anyway. So I sat in like a stairway, very cramped, hot, at the top of the church to nurse her or nurse in the bathroom. Those are my only options at the church.
Well, but see, I'm that type. I will go ahead and be out there with my stuff, and I did. And, you know, if people have something to say, then they have something to say. But when you say preparing to breastfeed, that was in my mind. The preparation of, you know, what am I going to do? How am I going to handle it? Yep. So that was a big piece for me.
What kind of response, and worried about what kind of response you're going to get from others.
Sherry Payne says Uzazi serves women of all races, but at the root, the organization is culture specific. Its purpose is to address maternal health disparities in the urban community, and Payne says that usually means African American women.
The only Caucasian person in the circle was you, and you were allowed because you're a reporter for today. Notice that there are other Caucasian people here, but they did not join the circle. That is purposeful. We're trying to create a safe space, what I like to call a sacred environment that is just for them, so that they can nurture one another, they can heal, they can rejuvenate, they can talk safely, speak about all the harm that has been done to them, process it, and take up a healthy attitude, healthy behaviors, and go on.
Part of developing a healthy attitude is seeing images that look like them. Sherry Payne says a lot of literature around breastfeeding and infant care shows pictures of Caucasian babies and women, but she says black women can't relate to that. So she displays photos of African American women breastfeeding and plays videos, like this one called Teach Me How to Breastfeed.
Baby like tea. Can you teach me how to breastfeed? I heard it's free, and all my baby really need. Yo, listen up, grab your partner, and I'll show you how. It's super easy and the best way to feed your child.
Here's national breastfeeding advocate Kathy Barber.
When you have generations of women that haven't breastfed, it's important for them to see images of themselves breastfeeding to say, okay, this actually does happen.
Other organizations in Kansas City have taken notice of Uzazi Village.
Sherry speaking.
In her office at Swope Health Services, Sherry Tawhid takes a call while chatting with me at her desk. She's a breastfeeding educator with the government assistance program Women, Infants, and Children, or WIC. Tauheed says she meets a lot of women needing maternal health services. She refers them to programs like Healthy Start through Mother and Child Health Coalition, or The Birthplace at Truman Medical Center. She tells me that in the last year, she started referring women to Uzazi Village. Even though it's a young organization, Tauheed tells me that so far, she likes what she sees.
That has been a real flower in the weeds. They're in the heart of the community and really engaging.
Kathy Barber says that despite national initiatives, there's no consensus on how to address the disparities in breastfeeding. But she thinks the answer will blossom from within the African American community.
The community, the people who are dealing with a particular problem, they already have the solution in hand. They just need help with tweaking it and finessing it to bring it to fruition.
That's what Sherry Payne's trying to do at Uzazi Village. In the next 5 years, the community plans to expand the village by opening a birth center and an urban school of midwifery. For Casey Currents, I'm Monica Sandreski.
Thank you. Let's see. I think we're near the end of these anyway. So, okay. So why should it be culture specific? And we'll just have time for a couple of questions, so I'll zoom through these. I think this is the last slide, yeah. I'll take the first two together. Non-affinity with dominant normative culture models and distrust of the current healthcare system. So you really can't underestimate that. The distrust of the healthcare system is rampant in the African American community. I really can't overemphasize that enough. And so there is great distrust and the fact that has evolved is reasonable. there is reason for distrust. The huge impact of systemic racism and white privilege makes a culturally specific approach important. Adoption of Afrocentric attitudes, practices, beliefs do have a correlation with openness to new ideas. So does the state of pregnancy. A lot of our African American families are seeking safe spaces where they are welcome and understood. And I know it's important to me. When I was in that circle of friends, I will forever feel differently about each of those individuals, the one that gave a response and the ones who weren't able to give a response, because it spoke to me about something about how they saw me. Because if they could only name negative things about my culture, what did that say about their feelings about me? Yes, African American folks are seeking spaces where they feel understood and appreciated, and that's not the current healthcare system. Seeking appreciation for the black aesthetic, places where the same language is spoken, where they are understood, and that doesn't always happen in healthcare and public health settings. So we won't talk about the discussion question. I'll leave you to that on your own, but I will leave my contact information up and save the last couple minutes for questions or comments. Yes. There tends to be a correlation. I'm not saying one causes the other, but if you think about, and this may or may not be true in your setting, but if you think about African American women who wear their hair natural or wear head wraps, which tends toward the more Afrocentric rather than the processed straight hair, then you might notice that you're seeing greater numbers of women who easily and readily adapt to breastfeeding among women who show those characteristics also. Just that there might be a correlation. If you look for it, you might notice it. Yes? Well, they take the IBCLC test.